Welcome to the video series Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're now doing a sub-series under Culture, under Worldview and Origins, called Critical Thinking Skills in Science. And that's kind of a loaded sentence. And what we're going to do in the next 15 video series, chapters, is look at each one of those terms. Critical thinking, we're going to dive into that and what is meant by that and how do we do it, how do we learn it. And then skills, some see it as a skill and some see it as a innate ability. And then in science, and we're going to go over what do we mean by science. And so we're going to look at each one of those phrases. We're going to take them apart in this series. And I just invite you to go along with us. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist, and we've served for 25 years cross-culturally, which gave us a clear view of culture and worldview and how worldview is different and how education differs. And what we're going to be doing is looking at critical thinking skills in science based also on Bloom's taxonomy. But what we're going to do in this episode or this video is we're going to do an introduction to the class or introduction to the rest of the series and what you can expect and what you can look for. What I had grown up thinking and seeing was that this was science in that it was pretty much data in and facts out. And it was pretty much a dry process. It was a unbiased and just a straight through process. But when we got involved with the culture and teaching and different things in another culture, we realized that we don't look at the same world. The world is different according to different cultures. And so even if I, as a scientist, am looking at this world, maybe there's facets of my looking at it that I can't really, I don't understand. I'm blind to because of my culture and my understanding of or not understanding, that I do have a perspective, that I do come from a perspective. And when I go to another culture, I realized, and I have realized, that we have different perspectives on things. And it's not a right or wrong, but it's a different way of seeing the same world. Even though it be the same world, we might even interpret it as being quite different. I was thinking these things through when I came across a quote. I had to do some research, and I came across a quote by a non-Christian, non-creationist, Friedrich Nietzsche, and he says, "Facts are precisely what there is not, only interpretations." Now he was, I believe, a little radical in his proclamation of that facts there are not. I think what he was saying is that when we come up with facts, we are interpreting what happened. We're interpreting the event. And therefore, the facts that we come up with are interpretation, or our interpretation of what happened. And that's kind of like in a police report. They take a report and they take maybe various eyewitnesses, and very often those eyewitnesses don't report seeing exactly the same thing. From their perspective, they report what they saw, but the perspective also includes their culture, where are they coming from. And so this quote by Friedrich Nietzsche called my attention in that, okay, maybe I want to, or I need to look at things a little more openly, or say that, okay, maybe it's not a direct relationship of data in, facts out, like that image that I had with the lenses, but maybe it is something of a little bit different. And where is that? Where do I find that? And I was doing some more reading, and I came across this quote by a biologist, and he's pretty well known, Richard Dawkins. He's not really a friend of Christianity or of creation science, but he is outspoken, and I found this quote of his interesting because he, being a scientist, says, "I want to persuade the reader not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could, in principle, solve the mystery of our existence." And that called my attention because I was starting to get into worldview, because I understood now that different cultures view the world differently. And so how does a worldview influence my perspective? And how do I get a worldview? Where does that come from? And this is a scientist that's saying he not only wants to convince us that the way he interprets things are true and are the best way to do it, but he says that in his interpretation he follows a model. He follows a worldview, and in the same sentence he later calls it a theory, which we'll go into a little bit, and how theory and worldview are very closely related terms. He says, "I want to persuade the reader not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could, in principle, solve the mystery of our existence." So he's going to solve the mystery of our existence via a Darwinian worldview. I tried to research what exactly were the components of a Darwinian worldview, and I did not come up with a lot. So, but what I do know about worldview is composed of several different elements that compose a total worldview, and that is what we're going to get into. This series is going to be using this quote by Stephen Jay Gould, which it was building because first it was Friedrich Nietzsche. It says first there's not facts, there's only interpretations. And then we got Richard Dawkins coming in with his, "I want to convince you of the Darwinian worldview being true." And so now I'm starting to see, okay, I'm seeing science is not a direct in and out process. Science is not, but it is maybe a little colored by the one doing the interpretation, by the one interpreting. And that's what got me thinking, because there's only one accepted model in academics, which is evolutionary science. But open it up to Christianity, and there's like 5 other models that are included as scientific models, not accepted by the mainstream science because they transgress the line of letting in the supernatural. But this is when I came across this other quote by Stephen Jay Gould, a biologist, botanist, paleontologist, passed away years ago, but he was very well known for his stand in science. He was very well respected, but this is what he contributed. He said, "First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people." Okay, so we can be reasonable and still not see things the same way. Why? How's that? Well, then he goes on to say, "Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them." Perception. Stephen Jay Gould. That quote fascinated me because that opened the door for me, saying, okay, I understand culture, how culture influences the way I see things. But now Stephen Jay Gould gave some other categories to take a look at, including theory, habit, prejudice, and culture. What we're going to do is we're going to go over those terms, how they look at it, and then we're going to, I'll show you what we tend to do. I intend to go over. This is an overview of the next 13 chapters, 13 weeks. 1, introduction to the study. This is what we're in today. We're introducing the study. Number 2, chapter 2, we're going to go over cultural tendencies, Western versus non-Western cultural tendencies, and we're going to limit it down to cognitive tendencies that influence our thinking, influence our interpreting, influence the world or how we see the world. Third one is worldview and philosophy. We're going to go over those two terms and concepts, and we're going to compare the two and see how and what territories they cover and don't cover. And that's what, because we've got the worldview mentioned by Richard Dawkins as a Darwinian worldview. So we're going to go into worldview and philosophy and see what he means by that, and see how does your worldview parallel, or is it the same as a Darwinian worldview, or do you view the world differently? That's why we're going to go on to number 4, is building your own worldview and philosophy, because there is so much information out there. There are so many different interpretations of that information. There are so many different models out there. If we don't have our own criteria, personal criteria of a worldview and our own philosophy to interpret that data, then we're going to be swayed in any direction, in every direction, because we're just following the Darwinian worldview or the Stephen Jay Gould worldview, or whoever it is. But each one of them has a belief system. And that's where we need to incorporate our personal belief system into our own worldview and philosophy. And so if we have not done that yet, then it is very important that we really lay it out. What do I believe? What do I really believe? And base my worldview upon that. And so that is number 4. Number 5 then is looking at the biblical origin of man. Number 6, the terms knowledge, understanding, wisdom, seen through Bloom's taxonomy, and how those terms are defined by the world, and how does God define those terms through a biblical parameter. Then we're going to go on to number 7, science. Science is a Western science. We're going to look at what do you mean by Western science, and we're going to look at what science is and how does it work and from what basis. Number 8, we're going to look at science as a non-Western science and see how would a non-Westerner, or who was a non-Westerner? Well, a non-Westerner is somebody that has not been influenced by Western thinking. And it's not just geographical, it's a type, a pattern of thinking, where in our own United States, there are thinking patterns that are very Western, and there are patterns that are non-Western. And those might pertain to, like in a lot of different areas, an urban area versus a more rural area, that they have different thinking patterns. Number 9 is science and the different models that are proposed to view science or to practice science by, all done by a different worldview, all done by a little different belief system. So we're going to look at various models of that. Number 10 then is Western critical thinking applied to a Western atheistic science. The Western science, evolutionary science, is basically the rules, the ground rule is no supernatural. So if you have the ground rule of no supernatural, you have the ground rule of no God. So that's basically a science that operates under atheistic presuppositions or beliefs, meaning that, no, we're going to try to explain everything without God and without miracles. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply Western critical thinking. Now, why do I say that? Well, because critical thinking, different cultures think differently. And so when we're thinking critically, oftentimes what they mean in academics is Western critical thinking. And so we're going to look at that. Western critical thinking applied to Western atheistic science. Chapter 11 or week 11 would be non-Western critical thinking applied to a non-Western theistic science. Then chapters 12 and 13, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the required reading of the text. There's a textbook for the course, which is The Structures of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. And what we're going to do is chapter or number 12, week 12, we're going to look at chapters 1 through 6, and we're going to go through them and see if we can't highlight and see if we can't get as much out of as a group of each chapter. Number 13 then is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, the chapters 7 through 13. Now the textbook is not a Christian textbook, but what it does throw light upon is how science works and how do they come up to a scientific revolution. So that is an outline. That is where we're going with this course. Those 13 different units, chapters, and what I just coming back to again is the eyeglasses that are behind me here that show the interpretation method is straight lines coming up out of the world. What we're looking at is a world, but our interpretations of it are influenced by what Stephen Jay Gould says. First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. Now, what does he mean by that? There are facts that we choose to observe. Maybe there's other facts that we see or evidences that don't fit our model and we can't explain them, so we don't choose to observe them. We observe the facts that are more readily explained by our model. So he's saying we choose the facts, influence the facts we choose to observe. There's so many facts out there. There's so much evidence out there. We have to choose what to study. We have to choose what to apply. And he is saying, Stephen Jay Gould, we choose what we're going to study. We're going to choose the facts of which support or our model more easily interprets or gives an explanation of, and the way in which we perceive them. That is where we're going with this course. And obviously I have my biases, and each student has their bias, and the objective of the course is not to impose or convince of my bias, but it's to expose all of our biases. And according to Stephen Jay Gould, we really can't escape reasoning and observing without our biases. Our biases are what give us the framework to understand the world. So to be able to do something bias-free or just neutral, that is an old philosophy. That is the early philosophy of modern science. That is just logical positivism, which means that we have a one-to-one ratio of looking at the data, and what we see as the data is exactly what the data is. And that is what science was previously built on. But because of a shift and a realization that people see things differently, and we need to respect different perspectives, not indoctrinate, but respect different perspectives, then we are now changing to a model instead of the black and white, in that you have to do and believe in this worldview to practice our science. Can you use your own worldview and have your own science? Now, true, our own sciences would not, all of them, be readily acceptable in modern day science. In fact, none of them would be if they admit or allow for a supernatural influence in any way, whether it be God directly or whether it just be an intelligent designer or whether it be whatever, is that would not be accepted by this model. This model here proposes it's black and white, it's just 1-to-1, and that's the way it is. Or this other model that is now being proposed by other scientists saying, you know, there are influences. And what I see is not what all reasonable people see. I see things differently. So that is what we're going to be looking at in this course, is one, seeing that there are influences that influence people's perceptions and their cognitive evaluation, their thinking patterns to their critical thinking patterns. So that's what we're going to look at throughout this course. And I hope that you stay with me and that you follow, you do the homework, you do the reading, and that for your own benefit, that you leave this course convinced that, okay, I truly believe in the worldview that I have embraced, that I have developed, and this is my science. And my science is based on what I truly believe. That is what the course is about. And I hope that, like I said, that you stay with me and that you put some effort into it and do some research and dialogue with me about where you're at. What are you doing? What do you believe? What is your worldview? What is your philosophical position? And how does that influence what you see out there? We're Tim and Holly Nyquist, and this is Culture, Worldview, and Origins with the subtopic of critical thinking skills in science. Thank you for joining me, and look forward to seeing you in the next video.